So in the lecture time today, 3:30 to 4:30, I've organised for the Faculty of Arts librarian Leslie Smith to come and give you a how to use the library seminar, followed by a tour of the library, showing you where the computers are, where the photocopiers are, where the printers are, and all that. Because the reason we wanted you in... Yes? Yes, Pat?
I'm not sure how it happens, but we're finding it very difficult to hear you here.
All right. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's much better.
Don't know what you did. All right. Okay. Thank you, Patrick. So at 3:30, Leslie Smith, the Faculty of Arts librarian, will be here. She's giving a class for another subject, 2:30 to 3:30, so she'll be here about 3:35. And she'll walk you through how to use the computer, because the library catalogue is largely on the computer. And then she'll walk you through the library and talk to you about the library. Because the reason we want you enrolled in the subject as opposed to just turning up when you might feel like it, particularly for those non-award students, is that we want you to use the goodies of the university. And you can only use those if you are enrolled. So with your enrolment comes email. So you can now use email to talk with other people in the subject. It enables you to access the library's catalogue. It enables you to access the library's databases. It enables you to borrow books from the library, and it enables you to use the website for the subject, which we'll look at a little later. So a lot of goodies are located on the computer, and we need you in A, enrolled to get you to have access to that, and B, we need to ease you slowly into the pool about that. So I just want to, before I hand over to Stephen and John, I just simply want to walk you through the subject a little bit. What is it? Why is it? What are we going to get out of it? Those sort of things. The background of the subject is that we have, the university, as John has said, has a very strong and healthy commitment to community engagement. But this has largely been looking at what we do outside the university. And I'm thinking that a good way for the university to move forward in a creative way, unlike probably any other university in Australia, is to look at what we do inside the university. So we're now beginning to teach community engagement in a variety of ways. So this, what I'm on about today briefly, is community engagement and empowerment could be seen as new things for the university to deal with. But in actual fact, these are concepts with very, very long histories for universities. More than 100 years ago, a university education was first and foremost seen about creating in its graduates a life worth living. It wasn't necessarily about getting the degree. It wasn't about the graduation ceremony. It wasn't about getting the job, and it wasn't about making large sums of money, all of which can and will happen to the modern graduate. But it was about things which were largely unmeasurable, largely intangible. So creating good citizens, creating citizens who could make a good contribution to society. And I personally believe that universities here and overseas have forgotten that, along with the manic quest to get research grants, the manic quest to produce more and more graduates, and the manic quest to enrol more and more students. We've kind of forgotten sort of the moral, ethical, social underpinnings of a university education. For example, John Ruskin, a famous English writer more than 100 years ago, said a university education is to get the highest reward for toil is not what a person gets, but what he or she becomes by it. So what is the university education going to do for, to, and with you? And when you think about it, when we send our children off to university, this is one of the defining points in their lives. It is at this point that our children engage in a gulf broadening exercise between them and their parents, because they are acquiring a body of knowledge different from their parents. They are acquiring a body of knowledge in ways different from the ways their parents acquired their bodies of knowledge. And it's the beginning of the next generation moving on. And that next generation is about change. Change for the better. So really what we're doing, while we might be a little bit more proscriptive in this subject than other subjects, really this is perfectly in tune, perfectly in line with what a university education should be about. Creating better citizens, creating a better world, giving citizens and students the tools and the wherewithal to go and do that and to make the world a better place. And you don't, if you're not Tony Abbott and you're looking at the world and thinking that everything is going well, if you're not Abbott, you're probably looking at all the arrows and you're seeing them go in the wrong direction. So we probably need, as a society, as many hands to the pump to work on the big issues of the day: water, food, climate, environment, inequality, Indigenous health, we could go on for a long time. So this subject fits, I think, perfectly with what the traditional role of a university has been, and that is to engage with change and do good things. It's also about presenting a wide range of views, some provocative, some challenging, and I think it's probably fair to say that all of the speakers come with a caveat that they don't necessarily represent the views of the university, but they do represent views which the university is entitled to present. And if I could just show you what the list of graduate qualities are for the university, you will see that what we are about to see with the Faculty of Arts graduate qualities, that these are about creating informed students. So this is not a list for the budding revolutionary. These are the 5 qualities that we want every student from the Faculty of Arts to graduate with. So we want them to be informed. You cannot be informed if you're looking at a narrow body of knowledge. I would defy anyone to be well informed if they're not looking at a range of views which are over here and a range of views which are over there. So we want all our graduates, indeed we want everyone from this subject, to be well informed. We want them to be independent learners. So we want them to cut the Gordian knot with their parents, cut the Gordian knot with others, and do things for themselves. And as I've said in the subject guide, this subject is about creating in you, the student population, getting you to become your own community engagers and community empowerers. It's about getting you to solve problems. I would once again argue that solving problems would involve looking at a diverse range of views. It wouldn't matter whether it's the view of Hatton, wouldn't matter whether it's the view of Hill, the view of Kirby, the view of Dick Smith, the view of John Falzon, or whoever. They'll all be different. They'll all challenge you. They'll all be provocative. But they all go to at least those 3 qualities and the next 2 as well. So we want you to also be effective communicators. Not much point in having a huge body of knowledge and wanting to do something with it if you cannot communicate it well in writing or verbally. So we want you to step up to the plate, and the idea of UOW undergraduates and non-award students being in the same tutorial is better than cool. So we want all of you to emerge from this being better communicators than what you might be at this point in time. And we want you to be responsible, and it's this bit that I can play around with enormously. So we want to appreciate and respect diversity. You cannot appreciate and respect diversity if you don't get it. So we're giving you diversity, views which are out here, views which are in the middle, and views which are out there. So you're going to get diversity because we want you to, I think, tilt at the windmills of the big issues, local, national and international. So I think we've got a licence. In actual fact, I don't like these list of graduate qualities because the ones that we had before were far more robust. I could play with them much more. They gave us a licence to put you all in the intellectual washing machine and spin you around. I've got to be quite creative in how I interpret those this time round. But I think we've got a licence to present a wide, and if we can't present a wide range of challenging, provocative views in a place which has traditionally and historically been regarded as one of the bastions of free speech, then I think we should lock the university up, switch the lights off and walk away. If we cannot do that, then I think we're all diminished by it. So the other part, the background of this subject, comes from two broad, slightly connected but significantly different areas. John Hatton has been thinking about a subject like this for a long time, and much of the subject, while I might be the subject coordinator, much of the subject, I think it's fair to say, comes from John's lifelong commitment to campaigning against corruption, campaigning against the forces of darkness and evil, and trying to do good in society. So that process has been going on with John and with me and the university for some time. But I think the recent events in Wollongong, and who would have thought a humble plastic chair could actually do some good. I mean, I actually tried to buy this table from this dude, and because I thought it would be good if we could have the artefact. We could have the intellectual amanuensis John Hatton at the table of knowledge without going to ICAC. Now that'd be really cool. But the table's not for sale. I then thought I'd get one from Bunnings, which looked like this. I've got a very small car, and the table was very expensive, so I thought no. The photo would do just as well. So it's not quite true that I thank Beth Morgan every day for doing what she did, but probably without Beth Morgan doing what she did, we might not have accelerated the push to have a subject such as this. So I think the sacking of Wollongong Council, probably the most, in the words of the ICAC Commissioner Gerard Cripps, probably the worst case of systemic corruption that ICAC has ever looked at, and possibly, in the convicted sense, the worst case in Australia's history. What a great reputation for Wollongong. The sacking of that council and the sacking of Shellharbour Council, I mean, really, we had to act now. We were going to put this subject on, not in summer. This is actually the worst time to put the subject on. It's hot. We're all tired. Getting speakers in and out before Christmas and after Christmas, and getting students to listen up without having the word beach or pub ingrained on their foreheads is a bit of a trick, but we'll do it. We were actually going to put this on in normal session time, and that would have been 2012 by the time we ticked all the boxes. So it's John, the table of knowledge, and I shan't mention her name anymore, Beth Morgan. And when you think about it, a famous essay by an American sociologist, C. Wright Mills, he wrote a little book called The Sociological Imagination. I encourage you all to have a look at this, and particularly the chapter in it called On Intellectual Craftsmanship. And C. Wright Mills says that once you start to fine-tune your radar and look for the things that you want to look for, suddenly they'll appear everywhere. This is sort of like the female equivalent of going shopping for that dress and thinking you're the only person that's got it, and 10 minutes after having left Myers, you'll find that there are 6 other frocks like the one you've just bought, only because you've just fixated on what's in the plastic bag that you're carrying. So it's a version of that. And in the last week, even up until today, we've been faced with this. So last week on the television was the documentary on the Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia with Václav Havel. There was a program on the whistleblowers, and today, just less than an hour ago, on ABC News Online, the headline is "Protesters' Police Files to be Handed to Developer." And I thought, more interesting work in New South Wales, but apparently not. No, this is in Victoria, which just shows that things can actually flow across the Murray. So it seems that those protesters who are trying to stop the Wonthaggi desal plant are going to have their police files given to the developer of the project. Creative Policing in Victoria, I think. So once you start to look for that sort of thing, and I think many of you are here today because you want to fine-tune your vision and how to look for these things, you will find these things coming at you at a rapid rate of knots. It's not often, in fact, I cannot recall in my career as an academic seeing a subject guide that's got several paragraphs of acknowledgements. Indeed, of all the subjects I've ever taught and produced, maybe 50 or 60, I've never put any acknowledgements in any of them. But we do need to acknowledge some people. We need to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land that we deliver the subject on. And if it hadn't have been for John Hatton, Stephen and myself going to the Vice-Chancellor and taking a bit of a risk in asking him to support the subject. Oh, and by the way, Vice-Chancellor, we want students to enrol in this subject from outside the community. He said, sure, no worries. And we said, for free. And he said, sure, no worries. And that I thought was going to be easy, but it actually took a team of 16 people, 2.5 weeks, to get everyone who's a non-award member of the subject enrolled, because you all had to be enrolled manually. And for those who are running a little late, try not to come and see me, because I think my patience, the patience that Student Central has got with me is now well into the negative category. There are people from the School of History and Politics who have made valuable suggestions. There are people outside the School of History and Politics who have also made some valuable suggestions. There are 2 students, I don't think they're here today, from Year 11 who were my work experience students a little earlier in the year, who started the compilation of the bibliography. And Andrea Kornhoff, who's here today, I think. Andrea Kornhoff, who worked on the bibliography from the Centre for Student Engagement, which is the first time I think a subject has formally had a formal engagement with that unit, worked on the remainder of the bibliography. So I think we owe a debt to Professor Sutton, the Vice-Chancellor. We certainly owe a debt to John Patterson, who, as well as running around the campus collecting accolades and wild rounds of applause while the VC's in Dubai, has provided the funds. When Stephen and I had our first conversation with Pato, he was looking at 5 students in this subject would constitute success. We're well over 110. So if 5 is success, I don't know what 110 is. It's off the scale. We also owe a debt to Rob Castle, who chairs the university's committee on community engagement. He's at a graduation function today in Bega. The VC, as we know, is in Dubai. Was Rob who sent the email to admin to say enrol people for free. And I think some of those people who received that email have taken Rob off their Christmas card list. I won't give you all their names, they're all listed in the acknowledgements. We have a wonderful community engagement committee on this campus. Monique Harper-Richardson, who is the CE manager, is here today. And without that committee giving some feedback and fine-tuning and editing to the subject, we wouldn't be here today. I should actually tell you, we've had one go at doing this before. About 2 years ago, I took a similar proposal to a working breakfast of a group of deans. So we met with them at about 8 o'clock in the morning. I didn't know the deans got up that early, but apparently they do. And the response was redefined underwhelming. I think there was 1 out of the 9 deans on campus who supported it, and that was my dean. That was because I told him to. The other 8 squashed it, so I retreated, muttered some interesting conversations to myself in my office and regrouped, and this is that proposal revisited and done in a much slicker and winning way. I should perhaps write to those other 8 deans and tell them what's happened. So to Monique and Tara Lottie, who works in the unit, they deserve special mention. Also have a community engagement committee in the Faculty of Arts, and without them driving me forward and driving the ideas forward, we wouldn't have had it. And we've had the support of the Dean, the Associate Dean and my Head of School. But I guess most importantly, it's clear that a subject such as this has a market. It's clear that more people who are not University of Wollongong undergraduates are interested in spending their summer feeding their brains in interesting ways than University of Wollongong undergraduates. And you are all to be congratulated and thanked immensely for turning up and enrolling in the subject. I won't go through the subject guide much more, except to say that for UOW undergraduates, this is a normal third-year subject. You will approach it. You won't be frightened by those who are non-award students. They won't bite. I've got that in the contract. But it's a normal subject for you, and it's 8 credit points will be yours if you successfully pass it. For non-award students, you're in the best of all worlds. You're in the win-win-win-win situation. While some of you may have looked quickly at the subject guide and have noticed that there are some assessment tasks like a seminar presentation, a book review, a long essay of 3,000 words, some online discussions involving technologies that you mightn't have heard of, turning up at tutorials, it doesn't matter. You can do as much of this as you want. You can do as little as you want. What can we do to you? I can't fail you because in one funny kind of way you're not technically enrolled. So you can drop into the lectures how many times you like. You can come to as many tutorials as you want. You can do what you like. If you want to do all of the enrolment assessment tasks, knock yourself out. If you don't want to do any of them, knock yourself out. So you can't lose. There will be a presentation for non-award community members on the last lecture for having successfully attended, and there will be a prize for the non-award community member who writes the best essay, and there'll be a prize for the UOW student who writes the best essay, and we will present those on the last day. And the last day will be a little unusual because as well as Hill and Hatton and myself wrapping up, we'll have a film. It's the film by Sandra Perez called Under Black Skies. Beneath Black Skies, it's a history of coal mining in the Illawarra, another form of community empowerment. And as the director, writer, producer of the film, she'll screen the film. It takes about 40 minutes, and then she'll do a Q&A with you in the room. All the other speakers are kind of self-explanatory. One final thing, this would perhaps be the first time that an honorary Sarawak chief would have spoken with a group of students from the University of Wollongong. Stephen Hill, as well as being Emeritus Professor of Sociology, former Mr UNESCO in Southeast Asia, and who's had has a wonderful fund of stories about him and canoeing in various rivers throughout Southeast Asia, is actually an honorary Sarawak chief. Now the chiefdom comes with traditional tribal gear. I've asked him to deliver his lecture in traditional tribal gear, but apparently the amount of material that comes with the gear for the traditional tribal chief is less than a small pocket handkerchief. And I've said, no, we're not going down that road. So he will remain clothed. The ornamental materials that come with the giving of the honorary title will stay in the cupboard or the small box at home. The box is about that big. And on we go. So some of these speakers, like Luke McNamara informs me yesterday, the Dean of Law, that he's not going to do that lecture, but we're likely to have a visiting Professor of Law from Canada who's worked on Canada's Bill of Rights. So what is on this list might not be exactly how things will turn out, but we'll do our very best to give you exactly what you want. So I'd invite you to just trawl through the subject guide, have a look at the topics that are going to happen, and finally, before I hand over to Stephen, is that for those of you who are concerned about enrolling in tutorials, I will get the admin staff to switch the tutorial enrolment thing on tonight. As students, you can now go into the system and enrol. First tutorial will be Wednesday. If you don't get into the system and you cannot enrol electronically, don't panic. We'll divide you up on Wednesday and we'll go from there. So that might be all from me for the moment. I once again thank you for enrolling, and I'd now like to hand over to Stephen Hill, who will talk for a little while before we hand over to John for the rest of the day. Thank you.
Okay, like while we're sorting out things, I'd like to thank Glenn first up for inviting me to be able to speak in my formal clothes today. It's the second time, as a matter of fact, I've had this opportunity. The first time I actually did bring 24 of the tribal chiefs from West Papua to Jakarta by ship. They'd never been out of the jungle before. And we got to Jakarta, it became a major media role, and I said, well, why don't we have a press conference? And they said, yes, that's fine, we know about press conferences. And I said, we'll do it at the United Nations building. And they all came to the United Nations building, and they said, we know all about this because in our society we have oration when we have major events, public events, ceremonies and so on. We talk. We're used to giving speeches, so that was fine. And they all arrived at the UN building, and they said, look, we want to dress formally for this, if that's okay. And I said, absolutely, no problem. And they took all their clothes off. And it is bigger than a handkerchief. It's actually a penis gourd, which one wears, but I left mine in the car. Look, just a few words. I'm not going to spend much time because I think we should hand over to the real guru of this session, which is John. I'd like to only to reinforce at the start, firstly, that this really is a unique course, and the intention, of course, is not just an academic intention, but very much to provide practical, streetwise knowledge, which is backed by the best we can find of what we do know within universities, about engaging with authorities, political system, media, and each other to actually make things happen in your community. It's got an absolutely practical outcome, but hopefully with knowledge which has probably never really come before any kind of course like this before. As you know, we've got a glittering array of external speakers. We're still juggling a few of the dates, but I think most of them are still going to work out. We're getting a few late entrants. It looks pretty much like we're going to get Jeffrey Robertson here in the week before Christmas. We have a late entrant from Harry Evans, who's the recently retired clerk of the Senate, who was an irritant to both sides of the Senate for many years, but a man with an acerbic and very appropriate style and approach to understanding Parliament. And we have people who really have been there in the sort of things which we can talk about in terms of development of community engagement. The idea of running the course this way came out of the community, and it came out of the community in Wollongong. And as Glenn said before, we had a particular benefit being in Wollongong because we do have a competitive advantage on corruption. So it allowed us a starting point which I thought gave us a superior position in developing a program at the University of Wollongong. My own role has been probably more than anything else as a kind of a midwife, somewhere between, or mid-spouse, between community interests and particularly John, because John independently for years, as Glenn said, has had the idea of developing this kind of program and support. And then helping Glenn particularly to make it all happen within the university system, which has its own interests and limitations and capacities. What I mainly want to mention now is just simply where this fits in international understanding and knowledge, what's happening around the world, very particularly in the Asia-Pacific region. Now, I think Glenn and John mentioned before that I'd had some experience there. I came back to the university only quite recently to an emeritus professor position. That means they don't pay me anything, and I sort of do things here and there. From a job where I was previously regional director and ambassador of the agency UNESCO for Asia and the Pacific. Now, this meant covering pretty broad territory of countries and people. I probably knew 15 or 16 of the countries quite well. Countries like, for example, North Korea, that I've been to several times, is not really big on community engagement just yet, but we still hope. But there was about 44 countries involved in this. The point is simply this. I learnt enormously, as one does, particularly that in the context of what in the last 10 or 15 years, during the 1990s and 2000s, what is being a constantly moving political, economic, social and cultural transformation of this whole region, what matters most importantly of all is the power of the people. I mean, I had a very, very clear demonstration of this on my doorstep when I was in Jakarta. From the UN building, literally the revolution that created the downfall of President Suharto was happening outside my office, in particular because the United Nations building was the main stopping off point for any demonstration who wanted to do something that got to the international press. So we developed quite a unique and well-developed understanding of when demonstrations went past, always between 11 o'clock and 4, we found. We eventually at one stage were protected by 60 policemen who sat in our backyard trying to keep protection for us, but we were never quite sure about being protected. But what did happen was that what they had learnt to do to while away their time was to sing karaoke. So my office was surrounded most days by 60 karaoke singing policemen, sort of somewhere out of a British comedy series. It felt like that at times. The point is that the mass demonstrations swept a dictator from power and set up all of the movements, slowly moving with all the faults that had happened with any society towards democracy. As you know from history, more dramatically was the impact of Mahatma Gandhi, who overthrew an empire, basically by being a very simple person who went to get some salt from the ocean, because it was a clear demonstration of the injustice that that particular system was thrusting upon the local people. People's Power, Cory Aquino, and as Glenn said before, it was on TV about Czechoslovakia in the last week or so, the Velvet Revolution. And what it's showing us at the front end of this is that non-violent action together by people is very, very powerful indeed, even against the worst of dictatorships and of repression. Now, I'm not seeking in any way to foment revolution in this course. None of us are doing that. But what we are saying is that it just shows the power we have, if only we can capture that power. As John mentioned to me the other day, I think a nice aphorism, he said, the problems usually start at the top, the solutions come from the bottom. And I think John's absolutely right about that. The one thing which I noticed was really changing, though, was the impact, and this is affecting all of us, of globalization through the region and through our own lives and our own culture and our own times. The main negative consequence of this is an attitude which so easily develops of powerlessness amongst people that says, you can't stop progress, the developers are going to bloody well do it anyway, so let's just try and lay back and see if we can keep the view a little bit on the corners, or whatever it might be. In other words, to accept passively the impact of multinational and other forces on our lives. But meanwhile, what's actually being sapped, and I saw this so clearly in some of the countries, was the maintenance of the cultural and national identity and the will that is based on that to actually act. The ability to guide social change towards the public good rather than the interests of the few. And the relationships between nations and the people to be constructive, that is seriously or potentially at risk. Therefore, at heart is the meaning of our world and our ability to understand it and to take charge of it. And the evidence is very clear, we can. A dependent society is a weak society. What this meant, therefore, was in literally every single program that I ran across the countries I dealt with, and this was in some fairly difficult situations, for example, immediately after the revolution in Indonesia, amongst the conflict areas of southern Mindanao and elsewhere, universally, I found that successful social change development intervention basically happened, firstly because you listened to the people and what they knew and what they needed. Secondly, we facilitated the training and the support that was important to help people understand themselves they had power, to involve themselves in community empowerment, to engage with the people, to hand over real decisions and ultimately funding to the people themselves rather than try and control it from outside. The solutions come from the bottom, not from the top. And in my own case, because we were the UN, we could also act all the way through to the top end of government. In many cases, it was also clearing away debris that was holding back local communities in very tribal or otherwise situations, which is why, for example, I did bring firstly 24, then 2 other groups of tribal chiefs out of the jungles to Jakarta. They wanted to come. They asked me to come. They said, we want to understand this world. It therefore meant that the same lesson about community engagement or empowerment applied in the case of the tribal West Papuan people who were being exploited by illegal traders and foresters. That was the one project I was very proud to have my official United Nations dugout canoe, by the way. And then in Banjarsari, in the center of Jakarta, where, because the community wanted this, and over a period of time, we helped them shape a slum under the expressways into a green village that became an official ecotourism site of the city, and made its money from it in terms of small businesses growing plants and medicinal products and so on. And finally, as one amongst many, many, many examples, we had the ability to change the whole basic education system in Indonesia after the crises of 97, 98, financial and political, towards much more, in fact deep, decentralised community engagement of the people in education. The education before that was a one-way rote learning process, which is directly appropriate to a totalitarian state that's telling you what to do and doesn't like creativity. The people loved the idea. We turned it round, not just invited people in, but actually changed the system of education to decentralise it, brought the people in literally to train them about how they could help the schools, opened the classroom up and so on. It's now a universal policy across 42 million kids in the whole country. All of it, all of this, simply because of the power of the people and the power of the community. And that's what we're dealing with in this course. We're dealing with it here, and this is particularly where John Hatton can teach us so much, as can each of the other speakers we have. As I said, Wollongong is a great place to start. We do have a competitive advantage, not only in our corruption, but we have a competitive advantage in not having access to decent local political elections as well. But we certainly have the ability and the movements and the people, many of whom are here, as well as through the rest of the South Coast region, to become engaged, to make a difference, to understand what we're doing, and to move effectively the power of the people to be the power that is for the good of all, our own public good. I'll hand over to John, where you can hear some real thoughts. Thank you.